All right, so this is chapter 30, Great Depression. Now, because we are in an American school in the 21st century, we pretty much fall victim to the fact that we think everything happens here. And especially as we get into 20th century history, we fall victim to the fact that we think everything important either starts here, happens the most here, or is most important here. And so I'm going to attempt to disabuse you of that notion today. So in summary, here you go. The Great Depression happened here, yes, and it was awful. But the Great Depression is actually a global economic meltdown that impacts Western Europe, the United States, Latin America, and several other places in the world, just as bad as, if not worse than, the United States of America. So this again is where we try to break you of some of your middle school history that is somewhat oversimplified through no fault of the teachers, but simply because you're not ready for all the ins and outs of the history yet. So what we're going to do today and on Tuesday is attempt to clarify and probably make slightly more complex your understanding of this particular part of American and the world's history. Nick?
Would the German hyperinflation be considered part of the Great Depression?
Absolutely. Because when we say Great Depression now that you're not in middle school American history, when we say the Great Depression, what we're actually talking about is an economic depression that impacts the world. That is the Great Depression. So there's a Great Depression here, there's a Great Depression in Europe. It's the same Great Depression. It just happens in multiple locations. So, what are the reasons why this Great Depression happens? You already know some of them from previous years in history. So some of this is probably review. Here's the condensed list. War reparations, which is what?
Germany paying money to the Allies.
All right.
And coal.
It's the war debt. It's the debt that Germany has to pay as a result of the way that the Treaty of Versailles is written. $32 billion in damages that are assigned to Germany to pay to France and Great Britain and a couple other places as well. Yeah, it's an impossible sum of money. What that causes is inflation because of how Germany deals with the debt. Now, today I don't know what the exact comparison is, but it's an impossible sum then, so let me give you an impossible sum now. It would be like somebody telling you, you owe me $900 trillion. Bill Gates couldn't pay that off if he tried.
We can't pay off our $60 trillion.
Right. That pales in comparison to our country's existing national debt. It's an impossible sum of money. Now, if that were assigned to an individual, you would be screwed. You would have no way of paying that off. But countries have a couple options available to them that individuals do not. And the big one is the ability to print money. Now, if we fire up the printer back there and start printing off $100 bills, we're going to jail. Because we're not allowed to do that. We are not allowed to create our own additional money supply. That right is reserved for governments. And in fact, only the Department of the Treasury can do that. But in Germany's case, their Department of the Treasury, or whatever it was called, is well within its legal rights to print more money. And so as they're looking at ways to pay off this debt, the only feasible solution is to print enough money to pay this debt. Now here's the problem. Here's your Economics 101 super simple lesson. On average, let's say, and don't argue, just nod your heads even if it's not true. On average, let's say that you have, the average high school student has between $1 and $20 in their pocket on any given day. Nod your heads. Yes, this is true. I don't care if you have $2 million in your pocket on any given day. For the moment, go with it. So if the average high school student has between $1 and $20, that then impacts the value of money. in the high school. So $1 will get you something from a vending machine. $3 will get you a simple school lunch. Do you need to carry 50s? No. Do you really even need to carry 20s? No, because the value of the dollar is more or less related to the value of the things you need to buy. Now, when you see pennies in the hallway, do you go scrambling for them? Most people don't. Some people, if their head's up, they really need a lucky break today, they pick it up. Some people like to pick them up so they can throw them again. But pennies don't really have real value for you. Do they still have monetary value? Yeah. They're worth 1 cent. They're worth 1/100th of a dollar. But they don't really have any functional value, right? Okay. Right, but as currency, they have no functional value. Now, what would happen if we fired up that printer back there and started running off sheets of $100 bills to the point that you each walked out of here with $10,000? What has happened to the functional value of a $1 bill? Sahil? Well, I mean, if you've got $10,000, are you concerned now about $1? No. Right, it's like a penny to you. And if you have $10,000 and you drop a $100 bill on the ground in the press of traffic in the hallway, are you really going to sweat it if you've got 10 grand in your pocket? I mean, yes, because of the newness, right? You're not used to having $10,000, and so you're probably going to hoard all of it. But let's say we ran off $10,000 for you every time you walked into class. No. After a couple months, if you dropped $100, would you worry about it? No. Probably not. So what happens in Germany as a result of them printing off all this money is this. Prices then are affected. Because what's going to happen to the vending machines here if you guys start walking around with 10 grand?
Someone's going to think, oh, we can hike the prices.
Right. A diet soda from the vending machine is now going to be like 20 bucks. You can afford it. You got 10 grand. So the prices have to reflect the functional value of money. Trina? Okay. So if you have $10,000, do you worry as much about spending $1 or $5 or $10 or $20? No. Okay. Right now, since you don't have $10,000, does $20 seem like a lot of money to spend on something? Yeah. Depending on what it is, right? Okay. Now, if I said $20 to buy a car, you'd be like, sure, where do I sign? If I said $20 for a can of Diet Coke, you'd probably pass on that, right? Okay. So what inflation does is it inflates what money is able to purchase. Not a problem. So if we look at what happens in Germany with bread, right when the war ends, a loaf of bread costs about 1 mark, which is their currency, the mark instead of the dollar. With that 1 mark, you can get a loaf of bread. You go to the grocery store today, you get a loaf of Wonder Bread, it's like $1.89. 4 years after the war, because of inflation, because Germany has printed so much money, there is now so much more money in the money supply. Just like we were running off 10,000 for each of you. There's more money now. Prices go up to reflect that. That same loaf of bread, 4 years after the war, is now 160 marks. Just like what would happen to the vending machine. They're not going to charge you $1 for a Coke anymore. It's going to be 20. It's going to be 50. The value of the money changes. It still has the same number printed on the bill, but the value of that money, what it can buy, changes. Can you buy anything for a penny now? No. The value of that penny has changed. You listen to your grandparents, or if you have great-grandparents still around, or if you could talk to your great-great-grandparents, you'd get all those classic old people stories like, when I was a kid, we had penny for a candy and gas for a quarter. And The value of money has changed over time. What you see even a year later, and this shows you how quickly inflation takes hold. That same loaf of bread, 200
Trillion.
So we got 1,000, million, billion.
Trillion.
So 200 billion. 200 billion marks for a loaf of bread. That same loaf of bread that 5 years earlier cost a mark. That's what inflation does when Germany prints off all this money. Paul.
Over 2 summers ago, I went to one of my great aunt's house in Germany, and they had an entire wall. They just plastered marks all over, like from the 1 to the 10 to the $100 mark.
Yep.
I just look at it to all the money on the wall.
That is a great segue, Paul. So what do you do with all that old money that's virtually worthless? Well, some people start fires with it. That's them putting stacks of cash into the furnace. Because if you need 200 billion marks to buy a loaf of bread, does a 1 mark bill do you any good? A 10 mark bill? A 50 mark bill? A 100 mark bill? A 1,000 mark bill? A 10,000 mark bill? So what do you do with all these stacks of cash you got sitting around? Use it for fire. Give it to your kids to play with. Stacks of cash for building blocks. Yes, this is real. You think my Photoshop skills are that good? And when you go to the store to buy groceries, that's what you have to take with you. That's probably what you're going to spend at the market for a day or two worth of food. You're going to clear all of that off and put the food back on. It's probably going to take up less space than the money. Stephen? I'm glad you asked. You mean like those oversized checks that you win at tournaments? Oh, no, you mean like bigger value bills. Funny you ask. That's what they have to do. The highest denomination of the German mark. Before the war, the biggest bill they had was a 1,000 mark. So like today, the biggest bill we have in circulation is the $100 bill. 4 years after the war, they had to print a 10,000 mark because a loaf of bread costs 160 marks. What happens if you want to buy a house? Now, I want you to watch the progression here and see how fast it happens. February of 1923, they need a 1 million mark bill in circulation to make purchasing easier, so you're not carrying around stacks of cash. By July, so month 2 to month 7, so 5 months later, they need a 50 million mark to make purchasing easier for consumers. So you're not caring about the pennies and the nickels and the dimes anymore. It would be like if we suddenly needed a $500 bill because when I go to the grocery store, I'm going to absolutely drop $600, $700, $800, $900 for a normal week's worth of groceries. I eat a lot. By October, they need, everybody count the zeros together, 100 billion mark. And you also see what inflation does. It drops the value of what that money can buy. It's worth $24 in the US at the time. That's what the exchange rate would be if a German citizen came over here to visit in 1923. They would bring this crate of money and they get a couple 20s. And by Christmas of 1923, they have a 1,000, million, billion. They have a 4 trillion mark bill in circulation that is worth approximately $1 US. That is inflation. Nick.
Yes, 2 things. First, why did they distribute this currency they were printing? Why didn't they just all keep it in one stock and then give it to France?
What?
Why did they put the money that they were printing into the economy? Why didn't they all just put it in our time?
Because you can't do that because money is in circulation. The money that how many of you guys work? Wait for it, it'll happen soon. All right, so for the two of you that get a paycheck on a regular basis, you deposit that money in the bank. That money does not just sit there. Right, it's used by the bank. The bank loans it out. They give it to people that want to buy a car, buy a house, buy a boat, whatever. I'm buying all three. That's fine. Your money doesn't just stay there. So Germany can't print this massive sum of money and then shove it in a vault someplace that nobody's ever going to touch and say, look, I paid it. You can't ever use it because if you do, it's going to screw everything up. But look, there it is. It's paid. Debt's paid. Doesn't happen. As they pay off their debt, that money goes into circulation. And so German marks are now flooding the European financial market. There are now 32 billion more marks in circulation than there was last year. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody suddenly has more money because wealth is never evenly distributed. But there is now so much more currency that it has less value. Baseball cards. Do you guys know who Honus Wagner is?
Yeah.
That's always like the mythic baseball card.
Yeah.
All right, but like Babe Ruth, if I say Babe Ruth, you know Mickey Mantle. Okay. Who's Babe Ruth? Okay. Babe Ruth, big fat famous baseball player. His baseball card is worth a lot because there aren't very many. This is another basic economics concept called supply and demand and scarcity. If there isn't very much of something, what happens to its value if people want it? It goes up a lot. So anything collectible, you guys maybe lived through the Beanie Babies craze? Okay, same idea. A stupid $5 plush toy in scarce quantities suddenly becomes worth hundreds of dollars because somebody wants it that bad and they can't just walk into the store and get it. The same thing happens with currency. If there is a lot of it in circulation, it loses its value. Pennies. There's a lot of pennies in the world. Is anybody fighting over them? No. Be honest, sometimes when you get change back and there isn't a little, tip jar at the counter, like you might toss pennies in the trash. I have done this. I have thrown pennies away because it was more annoying to have them in my pocket. You're vacuuming out your car whenever you get one, and you're sucking pennies up that got, slid under the seat and in the carpet. You're sucking them up with the vacuum. You don't care. It's a penny. That's what happens to currency when you suddenly create so much more. Its value declines. Nick?
Did you ever hear about the stories in Germany where the workers in different places would ask for their paycheck in the morning so they could give it to their wives or husbands so that their spouse could run off to the grocery store and buy stuff
before the prices went up later. Yeah, absolutely. Emily?
Why was the inflation confined to Germany?
It wasn't. It starts in Germany, and it affects Germany the most because they're the ones that are creating more of their currency. So initially what happens is the German mark is devalued because there's so many more marks. But now what happens, because countries are economically interconnected, they all trade with each other. Now if you're a French corporation that sells goods in Germany, what happens to your ability to sell? Can the German people buy your goods as easily? No. That French company now has to take German marks. So again, like we said, money doesn't just sit in a bank. It's used. So American companies selling stuff in Germany are accepting German currency. German companies are selling things in England and France and Belgium and Switzerland and everything else. That money is circulating throughout Europe and then throughout the world. And so what will eventually happen is, as Germany's money devalues, it affects their ability to purchase, to buy and sell, and it affects other countries' abilities to deal with them economically. So like we said, we typically think of Great Depression, American things, stock market crash, oh, it's sad. You really need to see that it starts so much earlier. than this. It starts as soon as World War I ends. It just doesn't get to us until later. Mari. Very good. All right, another quick economics lesson. This chapter takes forever because of this. In days gone by, when countries went to paper money, like what we have in our wallets now, that money used to be backed up by some sort of precious commodity, typically gold or silver. So $1 on paper had a dollar's worth of gold sitting there, a substance that would not lose its value. But what happens if you can't get enough gold for all the currency you want to have in circulation? You eventually start printing money that isn't backed by gold. Here's the other problem. Banks loan out your money. So let's say that all of you guys, there's 30 of you, 29 of you in here today. Let's say 30 because that'll make my head hurt less. 30 of you all deposit $1,000 in my bank. So I have $30,000 at my disposal. Now the chances that all 30 of you come back on the same day and all ask for the full amount of money are very slim. So I'm maybe going to keep half of it in the vault just in case. The other 15,000, who can I pick on today? Michael. Michael comes in and wants to buy a car. He needs a loan. So I write him a loan for that $15,000 that I don't mind sending out. Now, have we increased the amount of money yet? No, there's still just $30,000. But as part of my deal with Michael, what is he going to have to do when he pays me back? Interest. So on that $15,000 loan, he's going to end up paying me an extra $2,000 in interest. So now when he pays me back, what's the total money in circulation? $32,000. Is that $2,000 backed up by anything? Did Michael repay me with $15,000 and then $2,000 and then $2,000 worth of gold? No. And if I took his $2,000 and went and bought $2,000 worth of gold, then I'd have $32,000 worth of gold and only $30,000 worth of paper. How many people's heads are spinning? It happens. So what happens is, especially because of banking, the money supply quickly outpaces whatever the backing is, silver or gold. And so at some point, most countries stop using gold or silver as a way to back their currency. And we simply go on the trust that a dollar bill is worth $1. Now that gets really scary all of a sudden when you realize you're just carrying a piece of paper that says $1. Nick?
Also, speaking of banks, at the beginning of the Depression, wasn't there a run on the banks where everyone did come and wanted all of their money back, and the banks didn't have it because they loaned it out?
Exactly. Mary Poppins, It's a Wonderful Life, take your pick, old movie. But yeah, a lot of them deal with that concept of if for whatever reason something bad happens, and something bad is going to happen right here, if you then need your money and you all come running back to my bank before Michael has paid me back, what happens?
You don't have the money.
15 of you aren't getting your money.
So 15 of us are going to beat up Michael.
Right. But even after you beat him up, he doesn't have the money. So you're not going to get anything back other than the satisfaction of beating him up. Right, but you know what happens with cars. You drive it off the lot, it loses its value. So you're never going to sell it. Yeah, because part of a tire is really going to do you a lot of good. Okay, time out. Steven. You could, but why would I want to lose that money? But as long as nobody else is worried about it. Why? It's so much easier to think short term. Isn't that what you guys do? How many of you read the chapter today? Yeah, that's what I thought. How many of you thought long-term and said, well, if I don't read it today, then I'm going to have to read that chapter and start studying over the weekend, and I won't start it till Sunday. That's going to ruin my Sunday, so I'm really going to spread it out now and do the smart thing. Right, and all the rest of you are like, I don't want to do it today. I'm going to do it later. Short-term's so much easier. Okay, we got to get past this first point because we're still only on this first point. No. All right, other things that have an impact. At the same time that countries are recovering from the war, farming is just getting over having had to support not only all the civilians, but all the soldiers with food. So guess what farmers were asked to do during World War I in the United States, Germany, France, England, wherever? Overproduce. Maximize your food output. Do whatever you can do. Grow as much as you can. We need every single grain of wheat to feed our soldiers and feed our people. What does that mean for the individual farmer? More money. So when the war ends, guess what they keep doing? Making as much food as possible because that means more money for them.
But that also means they overfarm the land.
So what that means on a macro level, on a broad level, is that there's too much food. Now that there's no war, we don't need that much food. Well, we'll get to the land in a second, but we don't need that much food. Now, is any individual farmer going to say, you know what, guys, I think there's probably too much food on the market now, so I'm not going to grow as much. I think you all should do that too. What are other farmers going to say? Yeah, you go ahead and do that, sucker. And I'm still going to overproduce because that means more money for me.
Isn't that the same thing happening with the cotton, or not cotton, but sugar plantations during
Yeah.
the Spanish
Yeah.
colonization?
And again, it's a question of scarcity. If there's a lot of something, what happens to the price? Price goes down.
A lot.
So what now happens to farmers as they continue to overproduce and the value of that food drops and drops and drops? They take out loans. They're not making as much money. And what's their solution to get back on top of this? For the individual farmer, how do you solve this problem? If you are going into debt, more. I need to make more to make more money. If I'm not making enough money to pay bills, I go get a second job and I work more. If you're a farmer, your solution is grow more food, buy more land, increase your output. Does that solve the macro problem? No, it makes it worse. Because now there's even more food. What does that do to the value of the product? Drops it even lower. Now you're even further in debt. So what this eventually means, it's great for the people shopping in the market because food gets really cheap. But it sucks for the farmer. Because now he takes out loan after loan after loan until he eventually defaults and loses his farm. And now he's unemployed. Now how does he get food?
I mean, if you're going to make that much food, you think keep stuff with it.
Yeah, banks don't like to do that though when you go bankrupt. They take it all. Sahil? Well, and one of the trends that we're going to see, and you see this a lot in economics, when you look at the micro view, which is the individual, or the individual company, or the individual country, and when you look at the macro view, which is everybody, typically what works well for one doesn't work well for the other. What works well for me as an individual can sometimes have the opposite effect on everybody. So here, what would the best thing have been for all of these farmers to do collectively? Decrease their output. Right, because if they all only farmed half of their land, there would have been so much less food in circulation. It would have made it more scarce. The price would have gone up. They would have made money with less food, and everything would have worked. But unless somebody orders them, forces them to cut their individual production, would that ever be the logical thing for them to do on their own? No. So what you're going to find is that quite often the logical thing to do for the individual is the worst possible thing for the larger group. Same thing happens colonially. Colonies have been forced into modes of overproduction for raw materials. So India, cotton. the British had demanded that India ramp up their cotton production as much as possible because they needed more uniforms. They need more jackets, more pants, more socks, more hats, whatever they needed. So, same thing happens here. War ends, India is still cranking out cotton like there's no tomorrow. What happens to the value of cotton? It goes down. So how do you solve that problem? Make more cotton. Well, what you should do, right. But the logical thing to do is make more, except that makes it worth less. So like we said, the Great Depression is a global problem. Because all of these colonies, all of these dependent economies in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, are suffering from the same problem. The logic at the time says if you want more money, make more stuff. Work harder. And that's not working right now. So then you get into this problem. When you don't have enough money to make ends meet, what do?
You go bankrupt.
Well, before you go bankrupt, you get a loan. You get a loan to make up the difference. You put it on your credit card. But then what happens if the next month you need even more money because you're even further in debt? You need another loan. Eventually you can't pay off your loan, and then what happens? Then they take all your stuff. They take your house, they take your car, they take your furniture, they take your land, they take your ability to work or make money or to live. But again, it all seems totally logical as you go step by step. Work harder, make more. Work harder, make more. Get a loan. We'll get back on this next year. Oh, crap, we didn't make enough money this year. Get another loan. We'll get on top of it next year. We'll work even harder. It doesn't work. It makes the problem worse. Ultimately because people didn't understand economics at the time. You didn't have professional economists that understood the micro and macro views and could tell political leaders, look, you have to stop people from doing this. You have to put caps on production. You have to make the farmers grow less. Nobody knew this. All they had was basic human reasoning, which said if you want to make more money, you go work harder. And nobody necessarily wanted to work together either, because you just come out of this war, everybody is focused on rebuilding themselves. You see this happen sometimes with, really devastating storms. Destroys 100 houses. Does the whole community get together and rebuild one house at a time? No, everybody wants their house fixed right now. Fix mine first. Screw everybody else. I want my stuff back. And so instead you get this lengthy rebuilding process because everybody's just focused on them. Now, what makes it worse, not what starts it, but what makes it worse? Black Tuesday, the stock market crash. And to understand that, you have to understand a few other problems. Yes, sir.
Oh, I was going to say the stock market, that people were putting too much money, they were putting too much trust in stocks. There was like a fad and a craze.
Right.
Oh, we'll go buy stocks because stocks are going up, up, up.
Right. So you know how we talked about in the reading quiz, the United States is producing a ton of stuff? Industry is booming? Okay. The stock market is kind of like legalized gambling. It's the same thing as going to a roulette table and putting chips down and spinning the wheel and betting that your number is going to come up. And if you win, you get money, and if you lose money. The stock market's like legalized gambling because you're betting that a company will improve. Now, when you gamble, the expectation is more often than not you're going to lose. But in the 20s, investing in the stock market was pretty much a sure thing. You couldn't lose because industry was booming. Everybody was making money. You could get the New York stock tips sheet, which is just page after page after page in the newspaper of these microscopic letters because there's so many companies. And investors will pore over those and look for trends and patterns and see who's doing well and see who's not doing well and see who's about to have a change in leadership that might affect their company's value and see who's coming out with a new product that might make them worth more. in the 20s, you could have closed your eyes, taken a dart, thrown it at the newspaper, and whatever stock the dart hit, you could have invested money and you probably would have made money. It was a no-brainer. And everybody wanted to get in on this. Not just the rich, but even the middle class and even the lower class. But the problem is, if you want to gamble, you got to be able to put money down on the table. Well, some people didn't have that. And so what they created was something called buying on margin. It's a loan, and this is part of the loan cycle. If I want to go buy stock in Apple, I think Apple right now is selling at something like $600 a share. So I would need $600 to buy one share of Apple. Now, you don't make any money with one share. You make money when you buy 100 shares or 1,000 shares. So if I want to make money on Apple because they're going to come out with yet another iPhone for some ungodly reason, I would need, to buy 1,000 shares, I would need $600,000 to invest. I don't know if you know me, I don't have $600,000. So what they started doing was allowing people to buy on margin. A stockbroker, essentially a bank, would back your purchase. And so they would ask you for a down payment. Here's $100. You can buy $1,000 worth of stock. You know you're going to make money. You know tomorrow that $1,000 worth of stock is worth $2,000. You pay back your loan, you walk away a richer man. And as long as everything keeps going up, this works. We saw the same thing with the housing market back before 2008. Housing values kept going up. You guys ever watch like HGTV, house flippers, things like that? That was all the craze 5-6 years ago. Everybody, like I knew people in high school that I asked them, what are you going to do? You're going to go to college? They're like, no, when I graduate, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to flip it. Like that was their long-term plan. They were going to be a flipper. Because you could buy a house for $200,000, like redo one bathroom, and 2 months later the housing market would have gone up to the point that you could have resold that same house for an extra $50,000. It was a no-brainer scheme. And this keeps working unless what happens? It stops. Or you can't redo any more bathrooms. If at some point the value stops rising, somebody will have just bought in and now be faced with the prospect of losing money. I put down that $100 and I buy $1,000 worth of stock, and the next day, for whatever reason, some kind of fluke, it doesn't go up. Now, on a normal day, it's not really a big deal. You wait it out. But after years and years of growth, if there's a day where it doesn't go up, what do? You panic a little bit. And so maybe you sell it right back and get your money back and be like, that was close. I almost lost that money. But maybe you wait it out. And maybe the next day, for some bizarre reason, it drops. And your $1,000 worth of stock is now only worth $900. And you owe $900 because you bought $1,000 worth of stock for $100 out of your own pocket. So you owe $900. So if the stock value drops to $900 and you sell, you pay off the stockbroker, you lost your $100. But you're even. But what if you wait longer? Because you're like, no, it's going to go back up. And the next day it's worth $800.
Then you're in debt.
Now you're in debt. Because now even if you sell it and you get that $800 and you go to your stockbroker, you're like, here. Stockbroker counts it up. He's like, you owe me $900. This is $800. Where's my extra $100? You're like, be right back. And you run to the bank. Get out of your savings account. Except what if it drops more? And what if you had more than $100 invested? What if you had thousands? And what if it wasn't just you? What if it was 10,000 people? Now do you see the problem?
Money goes in a black hole.
Right. This is what makes it happen so much faster and makes it so much worse, is within one day, stock values plummet. And stocks that were worth $100 drop to $5. But again, you don't have one stock, you have thousands. You now owe thousands of dollars at a time when 20 bucks goes a long way. So now you have to get loans. Now you can't pay your loans back. So you go bankrupt. And take away your house and take away your car. This is what turns into the Great Depression in the United States. But it's that same economic meltdown in Western Europe, and then by proxy, Latin America, Africa, Asia. So what does it do? Well, it makes the banks fail because they didn't keep all the money on hand. It drops production. Because if all these people have lost money, guess what they're not doing when they go to the store? Buying stuff. They're buying the bare essentials. Which means they're not buying all the knickknacks, they're not buying the luxury items, they're not buying any of that stuff. So what this now means is that if you're a factory that makes some sort of luxury good, your stuff isn't coming off the shelves. So when the manager of a grocery store or, Walmart or whatever is going down the aisles checking their inventory and they're seeing shelves full of product, do they order more stuff? No, they're like, we don't need any of this. We got it. Nobody's buying it. So what does that mean then for the factory? If the orders that are coming in are significantly less.
They don't need as many people.
They don't need as many people. We don't need to produce as much, guys. You're all fired. We don't need you. We can cut back on an entire shift. Because we need to produce less. We need to save money. Well, when all those people are fired, they're not getting a paycheck. So what do they do when they go home? They spend less money. Which means the stores then have even fewer items coming off the shelves. Which means the factories need to produce even less. Which means they lay off more people. Which means fewer people spend money in the stores. Which means stores order less. Which means factories produce less. Which means they fire more people. Do you see all of these cycles that just feed on each other? Farmers produce more, farmers produce more, farmers produce more. Crop values fall. People buy less. Factories produce less. People get fired. So production drops by 1/3 within a few years. Unemployment hits record numbers. 1/4 of the population, in some places higher. There were some cities where unemployment reached 33%, 35%, 40% of the population, of the working population, was out of work. We don't count kids in there because we don't expect kids to work, and we don't count the super elderly because we don't expect them to work. So of the working population, 1/3 to almost half can't get a job. So how do you solve this? Well, tariffs seem like the logical thing. We're going to tax the crap out of any foreign good so that people only buy American goods. That'll put American workers back to work because American factories will have to produce more, which means American stores will have to get more supplies on the shelves, which American people will buy. And that works great only if American companies can get by only selling to Americans. But what happens if you have American companies that make their living by selling goods overseas? They're going to get tariffed as well. And I just made up that word. Tariffed isn't really a word. Right, you've just been tariffed. It doesn't work. But because nobody has this economics understanding, nobody sees the long term. They're only seeing the short run. And in the short run, all of these things seem totally logical. And they seem like they're going to work. And then nobody can figure out why it's not working, why it's getting worse and worse and worse. And just like today, what's the average American or German or British person or French person clamoring for? Fix it now. Fix it right now. Tomorrow, I want to be back to work, earning what I used to earn, living in the house I used to live in. I want it fixed now. And when it's not fixed tomorrow, who do they get mad at? The government. And they start blaming their political leaders. Fix it now. Fix it now. And then the longer this goes and people get elected during these crises, they get elected because they say they can fix it. And that's what people want. They want to fix it now. Fix it now. You can't fix fix these things now. You can't fix them in a week. You can't fix them in a month. And you really can't fix them in 6 months or a year or 2 years. But can you tell the people that? If a third of you are out of work and I'm running for President of the United States, can I say, guess what, guys? I have a plan. This plan's going to put us back on track. But here's the thing. You're not going to work for 2 years. You're probably going to lose your home. You're going to struggle to feed your kids. Your wife or husband may leave you because you can't provide for them. You guys, I hope you don't get fired. But if you follow my plan, in 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 or 6, things will be back to normal. Is anybody going to vote for me?
No.
Especially if the other guy's like, hey, I'll fix it tomorrow.
So you have to use platitudes and attacking the other candidate?
Yep. Politics at its finest. So you look at the social impacts. New York skyscrapers suddenly become prime places for formerly wealthy white-collar businessmen, rather than face the shame of going home and telling their wife not only that they were fired, but that they're financially ruined because they were invested in the stock market and they're going to lose their house. They choose the window. And they choose to drop 40 stories. You see people that lose their houses pack up because the bank just took their house away. And they go to landfills, and they go to dumps, and they find scrap metal and pieces of wood, and they build themselves little shanties. Give me one sec, Nick. And these are lovingly referred to by the name of the president at the time, Herbert Hoover. And you get the creation of these Hoovervilles, homeless cities within real cities for all these people that have lost their homes and have scrapped together some kind of shelter. I mean, this is what you see in third world barrios. This is what you see outside of Rio de Janeiro. This is what you see outside of Mexico City. This one, I think, is in Chicago. That's what the Great Depression does, not just in the United States. Yes, Nick?
No. Are there any actual records that say there was an increase in suicides after this?
Yep, I did not just make that up. Now, you're also going to see changes not only in spending habits, but also changes in social life. I think you guys may recognize the person in the red cape. It's not Batman. I forget how many of you are colorblind, apparently. One of the things that people turn to is make-believe. They need something to cheer them up. And so just like when you have a sad day, some people watch their favorite movie, some people curl up on the couch with a blanket, some people go get some ice cream. A new genre of entertainment comes out that allows people to believe that someday it's going to be okay. This superhero character that is capable of solving all of the problems right now. With super strength, super vision, super speed, the ability to fly. Superman solves impossible problems in moments. What a happier way to view your world in the midst of all this depression. Yes, Nick?
Did you also come out with being the comedy in terms of
Yeah. Now, we only have a minute or so left. So why not cram more information in? So we talked about who people are blaming. They're blaming their leaders. They're blaming their governments. They want a solution right now. You're going to have two problems and two solutions. If you have a democratic or representative form of government, you're going to see the same thing you see today, the fighting back and forth. One side wants to fix the problem one way, the other side wants to fix the problem the other way. They can't agree, they refuse to compromise, and nothing gets done. And meanwhile, more people are losing their jobs, more people are unemployed, more people are homeless. And so eventually what people demand, in addition to immediate change, is some form of government aid. And this is the way that some governments get themselves out of the Depression. So, FDR's New Deal. The government spends a ton of money. The government puts themselves into debt to give money back to people Because, and it works great, because if I give a guy 20 bucks a day to go dig a hole, and I give somebody else 20 bucks a day to fill that hole back in, what are both of them going to go do with that money? Spend it. Which then means the store orders more, which means the factory produces more, which means the factory now has to hire some people, which now means there's more people working. Now, sometimes government funds are sent to corporations, or they're done as tax deductions. But what FDR's New Deal does is it puts money in the hands of people and says, here, go spend it. And they do. And that begins to reverse some of these problems. Yes?
I've actually heard people who say that, economists, they say that the New Deal actually prolonged the Depression.
And there are other economists that say that it made it much, much shorter. I mean, you always have, economists are just as susceptible as everybody else to political ideologies, conservative and liberal. And I was actually just meeting Mr. Paterio, had an economist in here yesterday, a very conservative economist, who was basically ridiculing everything the government's done for the last 4 years, just on the basis that it was done by. Right. Now, your other option then is to let the government take total control and do so very aggressively, which is what you're going to see on the right-hand side, and we'll do that next class. So if you didn't already read the chapter, please read it, because there's a lot in there.